Welcome to the future of breach mitigation, threat surface reduction, and insider threat management, or the future of identity security. A bit about myself before I jump into the talk. I'm Gabrielle Comeau. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at SailPoint. Thank you. I've been in the cyber world for about 10 years. I've been in identity, for those of you who have been in identity for a while. My first summer job as an engineering student was actually at Hitachi ID Systems. I've also just aged myself. And I've had the pleasure to work with a number of cyber companies across various firms working on their identity projects. And it's now my pleasure to be part of the next wave of identity governance here at SailPoint. So let's jump right into it. This is why we're here. This is why so many companies across Canada and beyond are launching identity security programs, because identity is a key component in the current threat landscape. That's from the Identity Defined Security Alliance. If you're familiar with their work, you know that number is actually up from 2022. We can't afford not to continue securing identities. This is the goal programs sail towards, and this is the rock on which too many of them founder. We're used to identity governance as a smaller scale problem. Too many programs are still in the mindset that you just have your directory, a couple of enterprise systems, maybe like employees and contractors, and this is simply no longer the reality of modern identity. It has scaled well beyond what we're actually able to think through and manage as humans. I keep hearing this refrain from companies all the time, especially early in the identity journey. The number of types of identities and the number of applications they manage have just exploded. 5-10 years ago, it used to be you did governance for your directory, maybe 10 to 20 crown jewel applications. Now, 100 applications is table stakes. I've worked with medium-sized enterprises with 500 or more enterprise apps. And there's more types of users and more locations than ever. You've no longer just employees and contractors. You've got partners, vendors, interns, and students. It's become phenomenally complicated. The data has exploded in quantity and unfortunately not in quality. More sources just turns out to be more problems. We're obviously under a lot more pressure to manage cyber risk threats. I don't think I need to go too much into that. That's probably a very familiar refrain. Our constituents, the people we serve, are more concerned about their privacy, and reasonably so. The response to that is privacy laws, and that's great, but that also introduces greater complexity in our auditing and governance. And we're doing all this with the same size teams we had 10 years ago. There is just not enough cyber talent to go around. What that means is that traditional identity governance isn't enough anymore. Instead of having a good, thorough, comprehensive governance, we're getting this, which is basically the effectiveness plateau. We get a long, slow ramp up, and then a program that kind of sits. It sits, and it slowly diverges from the reality of what the enterprise is doing. It doesn't capture the organization's reality. It kind of drifts away and diverges. And then ultimately, it doesn't fulfill its purpose. It doesn't keep organizations safe. And there's a few root causes of that. The biggest issue is that we have trouble bringing other people into the security mindset. I hear this all the time from managers. I don't know what these entitlements are, I don't understand what I'm approving, and I don't want to hold back my team. Managers want to empower, and they're resistant to doing anything that makes their employees' lives harder. Unfortunately, that includes managing and removing access. They're overburdened with certification requirements. It's another task. They're running lean, as the business side might say. The teams and our teams don't have the visibility. Who here is really, really happy with the total visibility they have into their identities? I know CIBC has been saying nice things to us, but I see a bunch of heads shaking and no other hands going up. It's a super common problem. And all of this translates to excess risk. So, what do? We change the approach. Yes, this is the AI part of the talk, but we don't have a crystal ball here at SailPoint, but we have been working on data science and AI integrations to the product since 2017, when the trajectory of identity scale first became apparent. The biggest challenge that we have with identity programs is just managing and making appropriate decisions with the sheer volume of information that's coming in. And that's actually a really great problem for data science. Can we glean better insights and understanding about the state of identity and the state of an enterprise from this information we're already bringing in order to manage and govern? It turns out we can. And we can turn that into dynamically adapting access, maintaining a much higher degree of security than traditional IGA, and even helping the business side meet their goals and objectives to help you increase buy-in for cybersecurity. So that's autonomous identity security. And autonomous identity security is, it's about better data, better insights, just because with modern data analysis techniques, we can actually turn that information into really actionable stuff, slice and dice that in a really cool way, so you actually can much more deeply understand what access your environment actually has, what people are doing in there, and what matters to them. And obviously that feeds into automation and better visibility, which means better security and control. So let's talk a little bit about one of the central insights that we found transforms identity. How do you find inappropriate access? Any identity governance program that is to succeed needs to look at a sea of data much like this, and about as easy to pick out and follow and answer, how do you define inappropriate access? What is inappropriate access? And how do you find the highest risk users and highest risk combinations before there's an incident? And this is where data science shines, because you can start picking out who stands out in this crowd, who your highest risk points are, without having to have your team pouring through a bunch of reports and data. What we found incredibly effective is this peer group analysis. This is something that I first encountered actually here at SailPoint, and it just fundamentally changes how you look at and think about your program. Because it turns out, even in an enterprise environment where roles might not be clearly defined, people still tend to gravitate to looking like each other if they have similar roles. Instead of trying to come up with a top-down view of the appropriate access divorced from the context of your users, we help you mine it bottom up, and then inform that data into your role program. And this actually happens in our Identity Security Cloud on a nightly basis. So this effectively becomes an additional team member working with you. So these peer groups become the key to building powerful roles that actually help empower users rather than building what feels like restrictions to your business and user populations. And what's really cool is that we can even look at an outlier and understand just from how they relate to other users, what kind of user they probably are. So we found two types. These structural outliers are usually connected to 3 to 4 groups, but they don't really look like any one of them. And it turns out in practice, that's often a very long tenured employee, someone who's been there for 10, 15 years and has a lot of institutional memory, but also a bunch of roles and access that they don't need, that nobody deprovisioned. And the other challenge we see with these structural outliers often is that because they're so ingrained in the institutional memory, when role programs go to do model after access, they often pick long-running, long-tenured users, and instead of building greater security, they accidentally bake in those users' vulnerability into their roles and entitlements. The other type of outliers we find is these low similarity outliers. And they're a really interesting bunch because they tend to fall into one of 3 groups. Either one, they're an executive or someone who genuinely has a very unique role within the organization. 2, they're a testing account, someone who is part of IT's group of users to understand, just to test and build stuff out. Or 3, they're none of the above. They're gathering privileges, and then it's incredibly important to find out why. So instead of having to try to find these people post-incident, we thought, let's use data science, find them before there's a risk, not after. So this bakes into modern identity security in a bunch of really cool ways, so that ultimately the program, instead of plateauing, becomes much more effective and efficient. What we found working closely with customers is they ramp up so much faster. Our basic ramp up is now measured in weeks instead of months, because the solution becomes part of feeding into the data model rather than humans having to do everything themselves. And it helps you focus on the actual target areas. More on that in a second. And then even as the org changes, that's where the ongoing analysis comes in, because we can help you refine and build your access model out further instead of having to have humans do all that work. It becomes a consistent process of optimization instead of plateauing. So the long-term results are much more secure and also enable a much higher speed of business. So let's talk about how this bakes into the tech and into the whole program. So obviously, access modeling I've alluded to several times. Role mining gets a lot easier when you can turn to the product and go, hey, what are the common roles you're already discovering? Or feed in to a top-down model by using the data science to help build initial roles for you. This is one of the most common questions I used to get as a consultant trying to design identity governance problems. You go in and say, we should build roles, we should do a roles problem. And the customer's like, we don't know where to begin. We don't know. And I've seen that at big enterprises and even at smaller and mid-size. If you have any maturity in your program, it can be hard to keep track of who's got what. So having the tools to understand what's actually happening in the environment becomes a real game changer. And this also helps maintain roles over time. If you've got, say, a box folder that everyone in a department is getting access to, data science can actually flag that for you and give the role owner a tip. Hey, this is something that everyone's getting. Let's make it easier for the next person. So that also helps get the business on side, because this obviously feeds into automation. And obviously, we have fantastic world-class provisioning automation abilities. I'm not going to talk about that too much today. I'm going to focus on the data science and acceleration. But if you want to talk about that, we have a booth just over there, and we'd love to chat. And on the compliance side, we can help you bring, pardon me, bring managers on side into the cyber governance program. Simple power of AI recommendations, helping focus attention on the compliance items that matter most. Like, you probably don't need the certifiers to be paying too much attention to, say, the common IT share on SharePoint. But if somebody's got an unusual CyberArk admin access, that matters more. And that's what this is about finding. So we can put up a big not recommended flag and help focus manager attention there. We actually have over in the States a mature banking customer who was kind enough to share their data from the year before and the year after they enabled this in their environment. They found that, one, about 95% of their managers, 80, 90, give or take, used these recommendations and found them valuable, and those managers revoked 50% more access that year in the first year of these recommendations. This helped managers understand what their populations actually needed. No other changes. Nobody had to go in and write a few thousand entitlement descriptions, although we are working on features to help with that as well, and that's starting to come to general availability. But even just by the power of, hey, nobody else like this user has this, are you sure it's appropriate? They created a huge cybersecurity benefit. They were compliant the year before and compliant the year after, but the year after they were much more secure. And then the outliers I spoke to earlier, that's something we can bubble up as well. Bring that into a dashboard and understand risk scores and why somebody's an outlier, because that's almost as important as the fact that they are an outlier. Is it just that they don't look a ton like their peers? Do they have a ton of really rare access? That can inform different levels of risk and decision making. And you'll notice here that we have contextual insights. You might have noticed contextual insights on the last slide as well. And that, I think, is one of the things about AI that we do really right. It's not just, here's an AI recommendation. It's, here is why the AI made that decision, so that it's not a black box. It's something where a human can look in and understand the context and what that means for the program. Because obviously, an AI is great, it cannot be right 100% of the time. So it's important that AI provide context and insight into its decision making. And that is, like I said, I think that is one of the things here that we do really right in building out these recommendations. And of course, helping you find those higher risk users, separation of duties violations, before there's an incident and not after. And with data science and a data lake, you can even build out a timeline of an outlier's history. When did somebody become an outlier? When did they start gathering their access? That's clues, that's data. If somebody is slowly gathering permissions, that's probably a red flag. If somebody accidentally got a high-risk entitlement that they weren't supposed to have, it's valuable to know who approved that, who requested it, and why, so that you can understand the decision-making that went into that and correct it as needed. So, access history, you create a timeline of the access, and this can even go back to the particular date, so long as the product has been alive and in the environment, you can jump back and say, hey, what was Aaron's access in June of 2022, and see that. So, decision making aside, this is one area where AI and just the sheer scope of data science really helps build out a more complete cybersecurity picture. And then, obviously, SailPoint is not an island, so how do you bring Outliers, say out-of-band access. If somebody adds an entitlement to their account without going through the system, can we build a security event off that? Absolutely. Workflows and forms. We brought low-code interfaces into the product to make building out dynamic custom workflows easy and also more accessible. So with workflows, you can bring in information from a triggering event. So if somebody clicks a phishing email and is detected as compromised, you could build a workflow to quickly disable all their accounts and try to contain and mitigate that damage. If somebody is detected as an outlier within the product, you can create alerts based on that as well. Automatically create an access management campaign, flag that to your teams or the user's manager so that that data can feed in to one place where it's just all actioned on quickly and effectively, rather than trying to gather your different dashboards, different systems, and coordinate a response manually. We did put a whole BI tool in the product as well. That's something else I would love to talk about at the booth. But you have dozens of options here, both from a security perspective, but also in terms of business enablement, because sometimes it's valuable to have ticketing information from a manager or from a process. Forms can help you bring in information from outside the system. And then we can do a drag and drop UI with JSON here to simplify out the programming of this. That's one thing that we found continually is, on top of not having as many cybersecurity resources as we'd like, we also don't have as many programmers as we'd like. There is a fully fledged API, bean shell JavaScript, but having that drag and drop interface increases the accessibility of building out these flows and helps create a jumping off point to learn more about JSON and REST APIs. At least it did for me. So this is all a part of helping bring your users into the security process, helping them focus their attention in the right place, bring in the information that you need in order to understand your risk levels and make the most informed security decisions you can, and essentially have the solution, rather than just being an identity platform, become an active part of the decision-making process, the data gathering, collection, and for understanding insights better. So that's why we say we built with machine learning and AI as a foundation. Like I mentioned earlier, we started developing these capabilities in 2017, not just as a cool buzzword. We obviously have to bring that into your existing systems and workflows. We've been integrating with customers where they are for the better part of 20 years. I've been here about 6 months now. I've seen us integrate with everything from brand new SaaS apps to your classics like Workday and directories, even into mainframes, and build this out into a complete view and control of your enterprise security, but also for your business side as an accelerator, as a way to deliver access faster and also more safely. In essence, to discover, manage, and secure all of your identities so the right people have the right access at the right time. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. Now I'd love to open it up to questions. Yes.
All the capability that you're talking about here, does that apply to on-prem instances as well as SaaS?
So this is SaaS first. Some of these capabilities, recommendations, and and some of the others are available on-prem as well. I will if you'd love to talk to this in detail, I'd be happy to talk to you at the booth, or if Rob wants to take a high-level overview right now, because I am the SaaS expert, and Rob helps us on-prem. I'm putting you on the spot. Yes.
So most of our capabilities are available on both of our platforms. There are some, such as outlier detection today and risk scoring, that are available in the SaaS right now. And really that's because if you think about the development process, it's just easier and quicker to roll out new SaaS features than creating patches and search tags and providing new content. That's where a lot of these things you'll see first in our SaaS application. Later we'll get how we get into our
Yes.
Yes, so our latest release, sorry, thank you, Karen, keep me honest. Our latest release is 8.4 of our on-prem software, and that has a lot of this in it. So if you're on an earlier version, you won't be able to integrate it until you upgrade for those that have that yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so SIEM and SOAR insights would come in from an external source. That's more an extensibility feature than something we're necessarily building out. Go on.
So with AI and modeling, data that you feed into the model is very important. How big of a size that boldness you need to be able to have a good confidence in the models working and provide the services? And does the data come from the enterprise stuff? Does that mean that it has to be a certain size? Or
Yeah.
do you have a pool of sources, similarities that you think that you can?
So data always comes from within the enterprise itself, and that's something worth clearing out. This is about understanding and analyzing your data, because obviously there are confidentiality and risk concerns at play with trying to do this across multiple enterprises. But we don't need a huge data size. Our test beds are often only a few hundred identities, and they return quite high quality insights. Where it gets really valuable is that the AI can learn. Obviously, day one, you load in your initial directory, and then what we usually recommend that a lot of newer customers do is they often do start with an initial certification to do a cleanup and pruning. But even without that, as you develop roles, you can remove the entitlements you don't want, thin that, and develop the model over time. And then make up your volume of data just by volume of systems even. If you think about it, the scale is pretty rapid. Even if you've got 300 users, if you've got 10 systems, that's still 3,000 data points. And then obviously if you've got 100, even if not all 300 users are in those systems, you see how it grows. So you don't need a ton of users to get a really robust data set. Yes?
Are you referring to AI as Gen AI or just AI? And if it's Gen AI, did you develop or created your model or you're using open source?
We built our own models. Yeah.
We use both.
Yeah, thank you.
Both AI and Gen AI?
Yes.
Yeah.
Use both, and we do build our own models. Obviously, they're built on underlying algorithms, but thank you. Usually, I'm loud enough for everyone to hear. So we built our own models based on established algorithms, right, for both AI and Gen AI.
I have a related question to looking at the algorithms. Like, what kind of machine learning algorithms are you using? Like, I'm assuming that you use supervised machine learning. So, can you give me some examples of what algorithms are you utilizing? Sorry.
I know, I know that we use Louvain community detection for a lot of our peer group analysis. I believe there are a couple others in there as well. I am not a data science expert, but we do use a couple of different algorithms for peer group and commonality analysis and detection.
So we do have an entire data science team in our organization that runs this all the time. They are looking what's the best fit with
Yes.
what we built, but also how do we evolve? Does that mean new algorithms as they become available and develop? Do we incorporate into our platform and how we do things, and maybe remove older ones? Right, so as we're growing our platform and growing our capabilities, our data science team is finding what's the best to use for what we need to do. So it does change.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
I just have a question about your protection policies and how granular or flexible they are. I know we
Yeah.
something like location with different regional privacy policies.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of different ways we would tackle that, obviously without knowing the specifics of your case. It's hard to say detail, do X, but we do support segments so that you can restrict certain entitlements, roles, access profiles. Access profile, just imagine an IT role on a simple system, roles, a business role. But we can restrict that to certain departments, locations, you name it. There's also, and this is something else that I didn't entirely touch on in order to give enough time to the excellent questions and to the data science side, but we do have a cross-platform separation of duties engine. So we can check on that front and also manage and set up even general policies so that you can say identities in this location should not have access to X entitlement and report on that on a weekly or even daily basis.
And is that at the row and column level?
That is, I believe so, yes. Are there any last questions? Well then, thank you all very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.